Good evening and welcome back to Vegas October 1 Sounds. Tonight I'm going to take a little bit of a in-depth technical discussion on how to use the properties of muzzle blasts to decipher some of these volleys. The last two videos I've done have been advising people what not to do, and if you see these not to do things being done, to have some great suspicion in terms of the presenter of the channel. So tonight what I'm going to do is continue on with Volley 9 and look at it a little bit more in depth. And I'm going to use one of the standard videos that I've been using, which is, you can go to the vegasshootingmap.com, and I've highlighted the video that I'm going to be using, which is near the Luxor, but the shooting archive has the spot wrong. It's actually located up here, much nearer the entrance to the Luxor than previously thought. Alright, so with the location identified, we pull up my trusty dusty tool sonic visualizer, and here it is. That video only contains Volley 9 and a little bit of talking on either side, and you can see there's talking over there, talking here, and then in the middle you have the Volley 9, which, as everybody knows by now, consists of three parts, three bursts to Volley 9, a short one, a long, really long one, and then a 22 shot one, for a grand total of 100 shots. Tonight, though, I want to demonstrate the power of knowing where the muzzle blast sounds are. And we start off by looking in depth at this video, and this is one of the easiest videos to analyze because it's very pristine. There's not a lot of background noises to confuse the issue, and so we can get right down into the nitty-gritty of this. And the nitty-gritty of the first 7 shots, as you can see, create 14 sounds, 2 for each round fired. The first sound heard is the supersonic crack, followed very shortly thereafter by the muzzle blast. And once again, this supersonic crack is the sound that's heard from a supersonic projectile. So right away we know that we have a bullet that's traveling faster than the speed of sound. How much faster, you can't just off the cuff say, but you know, we could figure it out eventually. And the muzzle blast is not followed too far along past this, and there's very little gap between the two, which is the definition of lag. Lag is the difference in time of arrival between the supersonic crack and the corresponding muzzle blast, which in this case, as I've mentioned before, is on the order of 34 milliseconds. And for each one, let's see, it's 32 there, and 28 there, and 30 there, let's call it, and 36 there, and I can't tell because it's not showing me that, 31 there, and 37. So we go from 29 to 37, which isn't very much variance per se. So having accounted for, or at least it's superficially saying that these big bright sounds are muzzle blasts and supersonic cracks, what are all these other sounds? And in particular, you can see as you go along, there's these sounds right there, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, and there's something there, and there's actually something in between each of the volleys, each of the rounds that was fired. And if we look on the second burst, we'll see a similar phenomenon at the tail end, right here in this gap. That is, there are sounds there, and if we turn up the gain, you can see more and more of them, at the expense, of course, of kind of blurring out some of the real good sounds. And then again at the tail end of the third burst, we'll see that there are quite a few sounds. So the question becomes, what are they, and how do we know what they are? And the whole purpose of this is get to a point where I can explain these sounds Actually, let me pick a better one. I think there's better ones over here. Yeah, here we go. The whole point is going to be able to try to get to a point where I can explain what this sound is. And there's a couple, three of them in this volley, because right now we have a supersonic crack there, and we have a muzzle blast there, but yet we have something in there that kind of looks like another supersonic crack. And so that's an odd little thing there, and we have to determine what it is before we can make a conclusory statement about this whole volley. That is, you'd prefer to say that this whole volley, or at least I do anyway, contains nothing but the sounds produced by the supersonic crack and the muzzle blast. But when you see this type of thing in there, you have to either prove it's one sound or disprove it's not an independent shot. And I'm not going to prove one way or the other on this shot tonight, because I have to introduce first a couple of techniques that will be used to examine that shot. But suffice it to say that, I don't immediately see any corresponding muzzle blast, but that's hither nor thither. So get back to developing the technique, or how we can use muzzle blast to aid in the analysis of this whole volley. So the first thing that I would typically do is I would come along and I would mark where every single muzzle blast is located. And having already done that ahead of time, I'll just show it to you on this second pane. Now, this second pane is not aligned, so what I have to do is I put it on the second pane unaligned so that I can show you something a little bit later. So what I have to first do is line it up, and let's put this over here a little bit more. And so now, as you can see, I've lined up. I've first marked each muzzle blast and lined them up so that every single muzzle blast is marked with its corresponding label, or as Sonic Visualizer calls them, these are time instants. And I can export those and manipulate them and import them into Audacity and do all sorts of wonderful things with them. And with them I can now, measure the time between each round. I can measure, the average RPMs, the average variance, tell you what the time is. But overall, these 100 marks form a pattern, and it's the pattern of volley 9. And as I've indicated many times, that if both the source of the sound, i.e. the muzzle of the gun, and the recording device, which in this case is over there by the Luxor, are static, then these sounds this template or these marking of sounds may be applied and match perfectly with all other volley 9s, regardless of recording location, if that recording location is also static. And so I could take and load up another video, the sound from it anyway, and take these little muzzle blast templates, as I call them. This is what I call a template, and compare it to the signal of that other video and quickly identify whether or not the shots match up. And since we have these, and you can assert that, well, you don't really know that they're not moving because you have to have something else to compare to, but we know from looking at the video that there's very little movement in the camera, and it's basically just moving left to right. So we can say for certain that the camera's not moving, and then we can bring up another video, and if they're both the same and that camera is not moving, then we can assert then that the shooter is not moving. So let's go ahead and bring up another video, audio, and this one is taken from let me see where I took this one from. Okay, go back over to, this is one of my favorites, which I used a mnemonic called under, and it's located very near the front of the stage, right here. So if you want to go pull it up and listen to it, you can. I won't be listening to any audio tonight. I'm just going to do this all visually. Alright, so back to our sonic visualizer. So we got very near the front of the stage here. Now this audio is also a volley 9, and we quickly identify it because it has these gaps in it. But as you'll notice, it has a substantially larger lag. In this case, the lag is on the order of, is right there, and it can be measured many different spots. It can be measured here, and it won't be identical each time because the bullet paths are different, but it should be close. So if we bring up our measuring tool and we measure it down here, then we get something on the order of 0.325 seconds there. Over here it looks substantially larger, 0.397. The first burst, there aren't enough clear supersonic cracks to really measure it. Here we can measure it as about 0.295. Now that's just, not real accurate measurement, but close. Okay, so as opposed to the lag up here, which was on, as we previously indicated, was on the order of 30 milliseconds. So two videos, same volley, same actual bullets, but the lag is different because the recording location is different. And this second video is closer to the bullet path. We know that because the lag is bigger. The lag is small for the first one. Can't tell you just on looking at it how much closer, but definitely closer. So if we take this second audio and then we compare it to the markings for the muzzle blast from the first one, we can tell whether or not they line up. And then I use this little ruler to gauge the lining up factor. So I line up the first shot of the third burst with the first shot of the third burst on the template, and they match up. And then I'll go to the end and see if the same is true, and it is approximately true. Then I go over here, that one's true, and then I pick just a couple, 3 random ones. That's lined up, that's lined up, that's lined up. So right away we have used this template to identify confirm anyway quickly that these rather bright areas on the bottom here are in fact muzzle blasts. And over here we can then similarly here we have to move it this time. Sonic Visualizer isn't the best tool to do this with, but I just love the way it adjusts. So we already saw that they were lined up, or we will see. So if we line up the first one there, the first one here, which is the first shot of burst 9B, then we can see whether or not these line up. And that lines up, that lines up, that lines up, that lines up, that lines up. And here on this one we have a lineup, but we have an extra sound. So in checking things out, we'll have to figure out what was what, whether a bullet hit something or whether it's just an artifact of the supersonic crack creeping in or something else. And you see this all the time. But due to the proximity of that extra little sound there, which looks like a muzzle blast plus something else just on first blush, you have to say that it's probably associated with this one or more of these shots. But the odd thing here is that we know that the lag is large over here, so we'd like to at least know where those supersonic cracks are, but they don't appear to be forthcoming, so that represents a situation that we have to look at more carefully. But back to the muzzle blast. So the muzzle blasts line up with these down there, and we can quickly ascertain that this little sound here is not necessarily a direct path muzzle blast, but is something else. And we put it on our list to look at and eventually weed out or weed in or whatever we want. Just for shits and giggles, let's get this part up here back lined up. There we go. Okay, so we have ascertained that by marking all the muzzle blasts and applying them to multiple videos, and this is just an example of 2 videos, you could do this all over the place, that we were able to quickly determine where, or confirm anyway, that these brighter areas at the lower frequency in this second video are in fact muzzle blasts, and that because they line up across all 100 shots with this other video, then the probability of everything being static is extremely high. Now there's still a finitely small probability that it's not, and what you'd have to do is go down and look at these things at a millisecond level and confirm that in fact none of them moved much. But that's not the whole purpose tonight. Tonight the purpose is, how do we take advantage of this of this template of the muzzle blast within the same video? We've demonstrated that it can be used to quickly perform some superficial analysis on other videos to confirm that the source and the receivers are all static in nature to within a foot or two, and that even though the supersonic cracks in the second one are not even remotely the same as those up there, we still know that these are all the same rounds, because the muzzle blast represents 1 sound per round that is common to both. So if you want to come along and hypothesize that one or more of these supersonic cracks is associated with an independent round, you're going to have to deal with the situation that you're smack dab in the middle of known rounds, and it's going to be extremely difficult to say off the top that these are something else. The higher probability is that all these supersonic cracks are associated with these things, and if this were a complete set, we could count them and match them, and that'd be one way to do it. But it isn't a complete set, so we're going to have to do something different when we eventually get down to looking at that video. But back to the first video, and I'm going a little fast because I don't want to drag this out. So let's just get that back off our screen and focus on the first video, because right now we want to know what these sounds over here are. Well, we've got our little template, and if we were to slide this template to the right for the first burst, we would see that indeed there is some agreement but not here, but not enough. So if we look at, see if that first burst lines up in any fashion with those sounds by just sliding it back and forth, and we ultimately come to the point where yes, all 4 sounds line up perfectly with the first 4 muzzle blasts from the first burst. So that implies that it is very probable that these sounds are some sort of echo / reflection from these first 4 muzzle blasts that are located over there. That is, these muzzle blasts 1, 2, 3, 4, which are located some let's see here, .04 seconds. So there's some surface which produces a time delay of 1.04 seconds from the time that the first muzzle blast is heard to the time that this echo or reflection is heard. Okay, that's good. So we now can quickly use this template to quickly identify what other sounds may potentially be. Well, that's not the end of the story, because where there were 4, there must be at least 3 more, right? Yes, of course. What am I saying? Well, if we spread this out in a way that we can get the biggest possible spread across the entire thing. And then we line them up again. And we got the first four. They're pretty independent because there's no primary sounds going on at the same time. But over here we start to get the first few rounds of the second burst overlapping with where these things should have been. But if you look closely, the seventh one, for example, where the muzzle blast is, or the echo should have been, we see some extra intensity there. Similarly with the sixth one, we see some extra intensity up in here. For the third one, well, it overlapped so much that all it really did was make the first muzzle blast from the second burst larger. And you see this quite often. Now, it has the potential for either making it larger or softer depending upon the exact time and the phase. Because I said in my prior video, echoes or reflections have an inverted phase. And if they were to line up perfectly with another muzzle blast, and they were both of the same shape and amplitude, then they would subtract out, and you'd see a reduced intensity. But in this case, it's clearly larger intensity than some of them. But you also see that there's a little bit of cancellation going out on the bottom. So you'd have to drop down into the waveform and view it very, very carefully to see exact which. But you notice here then that that these three echoes or reflections over here now in fact are overlapping with other sounds. So that's an indication of how complex the whole thing can get very, very quickly, and that's just from one echo. If we were astute observers, we would also notice that in this region you also see some pretty significant things that look like they have a regular repeating pattern. And so if we slide this over there and to where we can see them, and we apply the similar technique, we can see if there's any match. Well, these two match up, and this one matches up, and it kind of matches up with some other stuff, but they're all corresponding to other big sounds, so it's kind of hard to see them. So let's see if there's a better pairing for those last two. Again, that one is about the same, and what we have to do is just get a little bigger here. It doesn't match exactly. Let's see if this last one, that one matches much more precisely for these two, but doesn't really distinguish itself there, and it wouldn't because it's primary. But over here and here we can see there are some sounds in there that probably mean that we have right now the alignment correct. So these sounds down here are another echo, and in this case, at least that's how I feel, are another echo. And in this case, the echo would be coming from there to there, and we'd have 0.260. So there's another surface somewhere that's reflecting the muzzle blast. So now we have at least two echoes for the muzzle blast, but that still doesn't account for all these other sounds. Okay, so so far we have two echoes, one delayed by 1.04 seconds, the other by 0.26, I think I said. But let's look very, very closely at this thing at distances that are extremely close to the original sounds. Okay, so if we align the first one, muzzle blast, with the secondary little sound right after the first muzzle blast, we see then that all these secondary little sounds line up. Take that off that one there. And so now we have a third echo, only this time it's very little distance away. In fact, it's only approximately 18 milliseconds. So that would indicate a reflection that probably came from a surface which is very close. If we go back and look at the video, it could either be the car that the echo is reflecting off, the ground, although in the case of the ground I would expect it to come back out a little further, or something else. So by matching up these templates with various peaks in the sound, we can identify with fairly straightforward visual technique here that there are at least 3 different echoes on the muzzle blasts alone. And I say at least 3 because there is likely to be more. And we haven't even started talking about the supersonic cracks, and I'm not going to in terms of echoes tonight. So the proof of the pudding here is, let's line up once again the first echo that was 1 point something seconds off. So we lined up these echoes, and then let's look what happened at the tail end. Okay, over there it looks like it's lining up. And if we were to drag this over there, zoom it out, and then reline those things back up, boom, 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 we could see that, yep, okay. So here, those are also echoes. But then this part's sound down there. Remember, it was lined up like that, and how they line up. So they all work out precisely the same in every case. And if we were to do the ones that were really, really close, right there, have to get close to make them precise. Yeah, that's precise. Okay, then we still have the same 3 echoes in the third burst. And so now we can explain a vast majority of sounds. Now, in this case, we've got something else that's happening between these rounds. And so we turn up the gain. Oh, that didn't quite do it, did it? Let's drop the window size down to get a more precise definition of when those things are occurring. And then we'll line them up on top of that. And then we'll expand it out to see if they're matching up. Okay, so these little bit stronger sounds we've already identified as an echo. We haven't looked at the things up top, but we're looking at these now in between things and trying to determine if they are in fact another echo of the muzzle blast, and to me it looks like they are, because they just match up too good. So that's a 4th echo. Now, why we didn't get these 4th things here, we'd have to go back and look at the video. As I recall, the person swept from left to right towards the Mandalay Bay location, and as they did so, they ended up resting directly on top of the hard surface of a car. So these may be that phenomena, and that would be one possible reason why we see them here and not at the start of the video over here. But there could be other reasons. Okay, so I think I've demonstrated the power of using these templates to eke out what some of the signals are inside of a burst. Now, if you try and apply the same technique to this down here, you will probably end up with a completely different set of echoes. And let's see if we can, right off the top, observe any echoes or sounds that we don't understand. And as you can see, because of the large background noise, it's rather hard to see much of anything going on. And there probably are things down there, but they're just too much clouded by the background noise to be discernible to any degree. And you know, come see, come saw, each video is different. Like I said, the top one is pristine with very little background noise, but at least here in the second video we can ascertain all of the muzzles and many of the supersonic cracks. Now you'll probably ask why these supersonic cracks aren't all the same. and that's primarily due to the fact that the bullet path changes, and therefore when the bullet path changes, the supersonic crack source location changes, i.e. each supersonic crack is being generated at a different point along the path, and therefore it has a different angle of arrival and different distance of arrival, and because of that both the intensity and the potential echoes are different. So the supersonic cracks really are a whole different beast. Sometimes, like in this first video up here, they're pretty regular because the lag is so small. They're almost always, very close to the, well, it actually is the other way around, this way. Very close to the muzzle blast. And in fact, if we were to take and measure the supersonic cracks, let's see, I believe I did that in this case. Yeah. That's not very good. Let's add another pane in here. We'll do that another time. I was going to show how the supersonic cracks and the muzzle blasts don't really correlate, but yet in some cases they come close to the same timing. And they come close when the lag is small, because if the lag is small, then you're kind of far away from the bullet path, and any change in direction of the bullet path represents a smaller portion of the overall lag. Or, if you want to state it in absolute terms, when you have a lag of 30 milliseconds, the absolute change for even a substantially large change in the bullet path is going to be on the order of half a millisecond, and since I don't have a scale that's that fine at the moment, you don't really see it. Whereas when you're dealing down here and the lag is 0.6 or something, then the relative or the absolute size of a change in the lag is big when the bullet path changes. So smaller errors or smaller changes in bullet path are easier to see when the lag is large. They're much harder to see up there, and therefore the changes are also harder to see, and therefore the timing between them is more consistent versus when you're real close to the bullet path. But anyway, the power of templates. So with one template from one volley, from one video, that can be applied against all videos containing the same volley, you have a powerful technique. Now, you can't, well, anyway, a powerful technique to help you decode what most of the sounds are at the lower frequency ranges, i.e. 1500 hertz and below. In this case, let's see, what are they? In the case of the first video up there, about 1500 hertz pretty much carries it, maybe as high as 1800 hertz. Down here, since there's a lot of background noise, 600 hertz would be adequate to quantify or qualify what a muzzle blast is. Alright, let me think about this for a moment, about what I've covered, and let's summarize it. To perform detailed analysis of any gunshot sounds, particularly when there's multiples of them, one of the most powerful techniques to use is to measure the muzzle blasts. And even when the source or the recording is changing, one template applied against itself to determine other echoing things is also still very powerful, because the echoes generally maintain the same timing between rounds as do the primary signals. But I would say more than 50% of all the videos in Vegas for one volley are generally static or include very little movement. And when they don't, it's kind of obvious. And even when they do, it's still possible to line up portions of that volley to quickly identify with this pattern which volley you're dealing with. So, can you do this with the ear? No. You can generally hear certain patterns, but you're not going to be able to tell whether there's one gun, two guns, three guns, half a gun, things like that by using the ear. You have to go to this level of detail, and you can do it with Sonic Visualizer. You could do the exact same process with Audacity, and there's a half a dozen other tools out there which have the available potential to generate spectrograms. But I think just Sonic Visualizer or Audacity are both accessible enough to the average user to perform these sort of analyses. Now, that's not to say you're going to pick up Sonic Visualizer in a day, because you're not. It's going to take a few weeks to become proficient at it. I think that Audacity is much more accessible, and has some features over and above Sonic Visualizer that recommend it for certain types of things. Audacity, it has a lot of filters that you can be applied to the audio to try a bunch of different things, and you can maintain multiple videos aligned much easier than in Sonic Visualizer. But Sonic Visualizer is more oriented towards the analysis side, and so it gives you a far different set of things that can be applied in terms of helping you identify onsets and the keys and the pitch and the strength and all that sort of stuff. And also, the beauty of Sonic Visualizer is that you have immediate and complete control over all the parameters right here in a little pane that's, what you see is what you get, whereas with Audacity, you have to go in and set one, then come back out and look and go back and forth, and, it just depends on what you want to do. But for setting up a global timeline, I would use Audacity. For analyzing individual volleys, I would use Sonic Visualizer. For generating these templates, I always use Sonic Visualizer, export it to a text file, and then convert that to an Audacity equivalent so that I can then import it into Audacity. And that works out pretty well for me. Although there is some maintaining, after I generate a new set of annotations from Sonic Visualizer, then have to go and re-import them back into the Audacity session. Alright, so once again, measure the muzzle blasts, look at the patterns, compare it to other videos, and you have a powerful technique for quickly and efficiently, garnering the details of particular sounds within a segment of audio. This is visual. This is not with the ear, though. Now, you could play any of these, but once again, as I've said in my prior two videos, merging two audios from two different sources is almost an exercise in futility. Because as you can see from this example alone, if I were to merge the top audio with the bottom audio, it would generate almost a continuous stream of sounds because of the large lag in the second one. And that probably would confuse most viewers and lead them to believe that there was something happening that wasn't. But in fact, all of these sounds in both videos were created by one gun with rounds fired, the same rounds fired and recorded in two different sessions, but producing way different sounds. And that's just the nature of gunshot acoustics. I mean, for example, if you take a look here at the spacing between these things, it's nowhere near the spacing that exists up there. And for example, since I went ahead and measured those, let's just take a look at that. And let's get into that another night. That's a whole other can of worms. So there we are, another fairly technical analysis of Volley 9 and how you can create these templates by measuring the times between muzzle blast and apply those measurements against many videos and ease the process of discovering what all those sounds are within a particular volley. Alright, that's a wrap, and we'll grab you in the next one.